going on, everybody? Thanks for joining another video. As you can tell from the thumbnail, today we're going to be tying what I like to call an egg-sucking chrome stone, which is basically just a fancy stonefly with a nice colored hot spot on the bead, but made specifically for steelhead and salmon. They seem to love these. The bigger the better, I've found. So let's get started. In the vise, I actually have a streamer hook, 3X. This is a size 8, and that's accompanied by a tungsten cool bead, fluorescent orange, and this is a 3.8 millimeter bead. I'll try my best to put all the links at the bottom in the description of the video for you. And for the thread, I'm going to be using UTC 140 denier in black. So to get started, what we're going to do is just start right behind the bead here. And you could add lead wire on these to give them even more weight. So I'll change them up based on the sizes. For this size in particular, I'll just, I find the tungsten bead suffices to give it more than enough weight. And I'm just gonna end my thread at the barb of the hook. And for the tail and for the legs, we're gonna be using some black solid silly legs. And I've gone ahead and pre-cut I took out about three strands. You won't need them all because as you tie and cut, you can just kind of reuse them as you tie. For general measurement purposes, I'll just use the hook as my general guide, and I'll place it on one side of the hook here. And then what I'm going to do is just do a couple collecting wraps. So you don't want to put too much tension on your wraps, just enough to hold it in place and make any slight adjustments. So here you can see I have it right on the side of the hook, and that's where I want to keep it. So once I have it there, what I'll do is I'll just give it some tension and then working my way to the front of the fly, give it one or two more wraps with some pretty good tension. I'll swing that same material over and loosely, just a couple collecting wraps again, making sure that I have it positioned where I want. And then I'll give it a few more wraps with some further tension to hold it in place. Then I'll cut that approximately the same size as the other side of the tail. And then at the end, I'm going to probably cut them some more based on whatever length I want. So what I'm going to do now is just work my way up to the head of the fly. And we're going to be tying on the ribbing, which is just some large black soft wire. I'm just going to cut off a strand here. What I'll do is I'll just tuck that underneath the bead. And I'll keep it on the underside of the hook. And then I work my way back. There are a couple ways you could tie this for the body. I chose 140 denier just because it's easier, but you could use black floss as well, some uni floss, that'll work good. It's just another material to tie, but and then you can tie them also in different I guess, widths or girth. You could add a lot of floss, you could add a lot of thread wraps, or you can just keep it slim. I typically like them pretty fat and juicy. I find these work particularly well in murky water. So what I think what happens, and again, I'm no fish guru or fish scientist or anything like that, but I think in the murky water with the big thick black body and these big flailing legs moving around the water, it just adds a really good silhouette and something for the fish to be able to see a bit easier. Okay, so there you can see I built a little bit of a taper. With the floss, it comes out a bit smoother and nicer, and you can really blend it all in. But again, in murky water, I don't think the fish care. And now we're going to grab our wire and just build some nice segmentation. Now with the large soft wire, you do want to be a little bit careful on how you cut it, making sure it's really locked off properly, because it is just a much thicker wire. I generally tie a lot of smaller nymphs and even some dry fly patterns, but a much thinner wire, like a brassy or an extra small. So there's two ways you can take off this ribbing, is you can sort of bend and create those creases and then helicopter, or if you have, just grab some wire cutters, which I find is kind of the cleanest. And just make sure that nothing gets really messed up with the segmentation you just worked so hard on. So I'm just going to flatten that down. And now we're ready to build up our little wing case. Well, it's actually a pretty big wing case. And for that, I'm using two pieces. It's going to be some Mirage tinsel in the color opal, size medium, and followed by some scud back, some 2mm scud back in the color brown stone. Again, you could use black, you could use clear, especially with the scud back. I mean, really the choice is yours. I like the brown because it's just dark enough, and also still just allows some of the material that we're going to tie on, like the thorax, to pop a little bit more as well. So what I'm doing is just taking off a piece of this tinsel. And then kind of like all materials, even tinsel has the natural curvature to it. So because I'm going to be tying it in this way and then flipping it forward, I'll just play to the curvature, so that I'm not constantly fighting it. So I'll just do some collecting wraps again, making sure that's sitting right on top and centered on my fly. And then because we're using 140 denier thread, I need to be extra cognizant of my wraps. I tend to do a lot of wraps out of paranoia. So I just cut a small piece of the scud back, and I'm going to tie that right on top pretty much the exact same way I tied in the tinsel, making sure that it's centered. And then I'll do a spot check. So when I do flip it forward like so, I want to make sure it looks nice, and I can bring that a tad further back. Then I'll secure all that remaining material. And that looks good to go. So for the thorax, I've played with lots of materials. I'm really liking the Togens brand ice dub here, and I'm going to be using the black. So what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing just enough to be able to cover the thorax area. I'm not building my full thorax yet, but just enough to be able to cover it up. And it's got just enough of that icy glimmer to give it an extra little pop in the water. And I just want to cover it and kind of end right in the middle of that thorax. Now we're ready to tie in our legs, and I'm going to be using the same black silly legs. So I'm just going to grab some spare pieces I have here. I'm going to bring that over. I'm going to grab my next piece. Keep that on the side. Okay, I'm just going to do 2 collecting wraps. Make sure they're sitting where I want them to sit, pretty much right on the side of the fly. And I'm just going to give my thread a little tension and really, really lock down these legs. And then the other thing I want to be aware of is how they're splayed out and tied in. So I do want them eventually to stay like this. But this is why we add just a little bit of thorax, and now we're going to finish the thorax off. And I'm going to grab a bit more of the same dubbing. This is where material clips might come in handy to be able to hold everything back. So I'm building a really thin, tight noodle. I find it just gives me a little bit more control when I'm finishing off the thorax on this step. So at this point, when I'm wrapping the rest of the dubbing on, I'm going to pay extra attention to make sure my legs do stay splayed the way I intended them to be, especially the front ones, because that'll help spread them out naturally. And once I have them in the way I want them to, finish off in the front here. Okay, that's looking all right. So now I'm going to bring my scud back forward for my wing case. Well, actually first, Let me just get rid of any of these stragglers. They drive me insane. So just securing, make sure it's centered. And then I'll do 2 good wraps. One in front. And then I'll pull up my scud back with some tension and nip it off, and then the rest of that was in there kind of gets sucked underneath the thread. I'll then pull over my tinsel. Make sure that's nice and centered. Perfect. There we go. And now we're ready for a whip finish. Seat your knot. Nice and close. Now we can trim down these legs. And again, the more you do, you kind of just know like where to cut. But again, if this is your first time tying this, you can use the end of or I guess the start of the hook bend as your measuring point and just start there. And now you can sort of see, do you want them shorter? Do you want them longer? In this case, I want them a bit shorter. And you can see how much movement they have. And now for the last step, I like to put some UV resin. I'm just getting rid of some of these hairs here so they don't get in my UV resin. I want to make sure it's kind of clean up top, especially of hair and fur. And at first, I just want to make sure my wing case and my thread wraps are covered. And if you're really picky like me and you want to add more of a bulb to the wing case, you can do that after the first layer is on there. Just makes it a little bit easier than trying to do it all at once. Hit that with the torch one more time. That should be good to go. And there you have it. This is the egg sucking chrome stone. Works wonders for me for steelhead and sometimes the odd salmon. The salmon really like the bigger ones. But hope you enjoyed. Hope you give it a try. Tune into the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.